65 years ago, in January 1951, Sergeant John Miller kissed his wife Margaret goodbye at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, never knowing it would be their final embrace. He was heading to Korea with his 8-man reconnaissance patrol, leaving behind a pregnant wife and the promise of returning home to meet his unborn child. The Korean War was raging, and Miller's unit was among thousands of American soldiers thrust into one of the most brutal conflicts of the 20th century. The Chosin Valley stretched before them like a frozen cemetery, its temperatures dropping to -30 degrees Fahrenheit. Miller's patrol, consisting of Corporal David Thompson, Private First Class Robert Hayes, Private William Santos, Private Michael O'Brien, Private James Richardson, Private Thomas Chen, Private Andrew Peterson, and Private Daniel Murphy, had been tasked with a routine reconnaissance mission. Their objective was simple: scout enemy positions in the valley and report back within 48 hours. What the military command didn't anticipate was the massive Chinese offensive that was about to engulf the entire region. As Miller's patrol advanced deeper into the valley, they were walking straight into what would become known as one of the most devastating battles of the Korean War. The frozen ground beneath their boots held secrets that wouldn't be revealed for over 6 decades. Margaret Miller waited at home, her pregnancy advancing while letters from her husband became increasingly sparse. The last communication she received was a brief note dated January 15, 1951. "The cold here is unlike anything I've ever experienced. Keep our baby warm for me. I'll be home soon." Those words would haunt her for the rest of her life, as soon became never. Back in the valley, Miller's patrol established their position on a ridge overlooking suspected enemy movements. The intelligence they gathered would prove crucial, but they would never live to deliver it. As night fell on January 16, 1951, Chinese forces began their encirclement. The 9 American soldiers found themselves trapped in a frozen hell, outnumbered and cut off from all communication with their base camp. The official military records would later show that Miller's patrol was reported missing during the Chinese Spring Offensive. Search and rescue operations were launched, but the chaos of battle and the extreme weather conditions made any meaningful search impossible. Within days, the entire American position in the Chosin Valley had to be abandoned as forces retreated south. For Margaret Miller and the 8 other families, the waiting began. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years. The telegram from the War Department arrived 3 months later. "Missing in action." 2 words that would define the next 65 years of their lives. 2 words that offered neither closure nor hope, just an endless void of uncertainty. The Korean War ended in 1953, but for these families, the war never truly ended. Miller's son, John Jr., was born 6 months after his father disappeared. He would grow up knowing his father only through photographs and stories, carrying the weight of a name that belonged to a ghost in the frozen valleys of Korea. Margaret Miller never remarried. In the small town of Clarksville, Tennessee, she became known as the war widow who never got her closure. Every Veterans Day, she would place flowers at the local memorial, standing before her husband's name etched in stone among the missing. Her son, John Jr., would stand beside her, a living reminder of the father he never knew. The Thompson family in Ohio faced their own private hell. David Thompson's mother, Eleanor, refused to pack away his belongings for 15 years. His room remained exactly as he left it: military medals on the dresser, letters from his girlfriend pinned to the wall, and a half-finished model airplane on his desk. Eleanor would often be found sitting in that room, talking to the photographs as if her son might walk through the door at any moment. In California, Robert Hayes' twin brother Richard carried survivor's guilt that would plague him for decades. The twins had enlisted together but were assigned to different units. Richard returned from Korea in 1952, but every celebration of his homecoming was overshadowed by his brother's absence. He became an advocate for missing soldiers' families, dedicating his life to ensuring no family would suffer the uncertainty his family endured. The Santos family in Texas established a ritual that continued for 30 years. Every Sunday after church, William's parents would drive to the local airfield and watch planes take off, hoping against hope that one might bring their son home. Maria Santos kept a candle burning in the window, a beacon for a son who would never see it. Michael O'Brien's father, a Boston police detective, used his investigative skills to piece together every detail of his son's final mission. He corresponded with other patrol members' families, created maps of the Chosin Valley, and filed countless requests with the military for information. His dining room became a command center filled with letters, maps, and photographs, a shrine to a mystery he would never solve in his lifetime. The years passed with agonizing slowness. Children grew up, parents aged, and some family members passed away, never knowing what happened to their loved ones. John Jr. graduated from high school in 1970, constantly comparing himself to the heroic image of the father he never knew. Would his father be proud? Would they have been friends? These questions haunted him as he struggled to find his own identity. By the 1980s, advances in forensic science began offering new hope to families of missing soldiers. DNA technology and improved archaeological techniques meant that remains could be identified even after decades. Margaret Miller, now in her 60s, began corresponding with the Army's Central Identification Laboratory, hoping that new technology might finally provide answers. The fall of the Soviet Union and improved relations with China in the 1990s opened new possibilities for recovery operations in North Korea. Joint recovery missions between the United States and various international organizations began systematically searching former battle sites. For families like the Millers, these developments represented the first real hope they had felt in decades. The 1990s brought a new generation of military investigators trained specifically in recovering remains from foreign conflicts. The Joint POW-MIA Accounting Command, JPAC, began conducting regular missions to Korea, focusing on sites where American servicemen were known to have gone missing. Each mission carried the hope of multiple families, but also the risk of continued disappointment. Margaret Miller, now a grandmother, received regular updates from JPAC about recovery efforts in Korea. Each phone call sent her heart racing, but year after year the news was the same. No trace of her husband's patrol had been found. The Chosin Valley had become a developed area, with roads and buildings covering much of the terrain where battles had occurred. John Jr., now a father himself, struggled with the decision of whether to pass on the burden of searching for his father to his own children. His daughter Sarah showed interest in her grandfather's story, but John Jr. worried about subjecting another generation to the pain of false hope and endless waiting. The Thompson family faced a different kind of tragedy. Eleanor Thompson passed away in 1998, having waited 47 years for news of her son David. Her final words to her daughter were about keeping David's room ready just in case. The room remained unchanged for another decade, a museum to a mother's unwavering faith and a son's eternal absence. Richard Hayes, Robert's twin brother, had become a successful businessman but used his resources to fund private investigations into his brother's disappearance. He hired former military personnel to conduct independent research, analyzing battle records and interviewing Korean War veterans who might have information about the Chosin Valley operations. The Santos family maintained their Sunday ritual well into the 2000s. Though Maria Santos was now in a wheelchair and could no longer make the weekly trips to the airfield, her granddaughter continued the tradition, understanding that some rituals transcend logic and serve needs deeper than rational explanation. Michael O'Brien's investigative efforts had produced one of the most comprehensive private archives of Korean War missing persons cases. His research would later prove invaluable to official recovery teams, providing detailed maps and eyewitness accounts that had been lost in military bureaucracy. By 2010, advances in ground-penetrating radar and satellite imagery were revolutionizing battlefield archaeology. JPAC investigators could now identify potential grave sites and equipment caches from aerial surveys, significantly reducing the time and cost of recovery operations. Now I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching us from and the exact time you're listening to this story. We're interested in knowing how far these documented accounts reach and at what moments of the day or night they arrive. The technology was promising, but the political situation in North Korea remained a significant obstacle. Most of the Chosin Valley lay within North Korean territory, making systematic searches nearly impossible. Families had to balance hope with the harsh reality that politics might forever prevent the recovery of their loved ones. In 2014, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A retired Chinese People's Liberation Army officer, now living in the United States, approached JPAC with information about American remains he had encountered during his service in Korea. Colonel Liu Wei had been a young soldier during the Korean War and possessed detailed knowledge of battlefield sites that had never been officially documented. Colonel Liu's testimony was extraordinary. He described finding American equipment and remains during a patrol in 1952, but under orders from his commanders, these discoveries were never reported to authorities. The location he described matched perfectly with the last known position of Sergeant Miller's patrol, but it was in an area that had been considered thoroughly searched. The information provided by Colonel Liu revealed that the patrol's final position was not where military records indicated. They had been forced to retreat nearly 2 miles north of their original objective, seeking shelter in a cave system that had provided temporary protection from both enemy forces and the brutal cold. JPAC investigators used Colonel Liu's intelligence to focus their search efforts on a previously unexplored section of the valley. Ground-penetrating radar detected anomalies consistent with buried metal objects, potentially equipment or identification tags that could lead to the patrol members' remains. Margaret Miller, now 85 years old, received the call she had been waiting for since 1951. JPAC officials informed her that they had identified a high-probability search site and were preparing for an excavation mission. After 63 years, there was finally concrete hope. The excavation presented unique challenges. The site was located in a politically sensitive area, requiring complex negotiations between multiple governments. Additionally, the extreme weather conditions that had claimed the patrol's lives continued to complicate recovery efforts, with the excavation window limited to a few months each year. John Jr., now in his 60s, traveled to Korea to observe the excavation process. Standing in the valley where his father had died, he felt a connection he had never experienced. The frozen landscape that had seemed like an enemy for so long suddenly felt like a protector, preserving evidence that would have been lost anywhere else. The excavation team included forensic anthropologists, military historians, and local guides who understood the terrain's seasonal changes. Each layer of soil they removed represented years of accumulated earth, time itself being excavated, along with the physical remains. Initial discoveries were promising but not conclusive. Military buttons, fragments of equipment, and personal items began emerging from the frozen ground. Each artifact was carefully catalogued and analyzed, building a picture of the patrol's final days that had been hidden for over 6 decades. The breakthrough moment came when excavators uncovered a cache of military equipment buried beneath a large rock formation. The item's positioning suggested they had been deliberately hidden, possibly as the patrol prepared for their final stand. Among these items were several identification tags, their metal surfaces blackened, but still readable after 63 years in the ground. On a crisp morning in March 2016, forensic anthropologist Dr. Sarah Chen made the discovery that would transform the lives of 9 families forever. Working carefully through layers of frozen earth, her brush touched something metallic. As she cleared away the surrounding soil, the unmistakable shape of a military identification tag emerged from its decades-long burial. The tag was blackened and corroded, but modern preservation techniques allowed laboratory specialists to reveal the stamped information. Miller, John S., 37458291, B, 15J and 29, RC. Sergeant John Miller's dog tag had finally been found, along with his wedding ring, still bearing the inscription, John and Margaret Forever, 1950. Dr. Chen's team worked with methodical precision, understanding that they were not just conducting an archaeological excavation, but providing closure to families who had waited nearly 70 years for answers. Each bone fragment, each piece of equipment, each personal item was treated with the reverence due to fallen heroes who had made the ultimate sacrifice. The cave system where the patrol had taken shelter revealed the full scope of their final battle. Evidence suggested they had held their position for several days, using the natural protection to maintain resistance against overwhelming enemy forces. Spent ammunition casings scattered throughout the cave told the story of their courage under impossible circumstances. Margaret Miller received the call on March 18, 2016. The JPAC official's voice was gentle but clear. "Mrs. Miller, we've found your husband." At 97 years old, she had outlived most of her generation, surviving long enough to learn the truth about the man she had loved and lost. Her response was simple. "I knew he would come home eventually." The identification process revealed remains belonging to all 9 patrol members. David Thompson's identification tags were found alongside a letter to his girlfriend that had never been sent. Robert Hayes' twin brother Richard, now in his 80s, wept when shown his brother's Purple Heart Medal, recovered from the cave after 6 decades. William Santos's remains were identified through dental records, his family's Sunday vigils at the airfield finally vindicated. His rosary, a gift from his mother before deployment, was recovered intact, its metal cross still attached despite the passage of time. The Santos family decided it would be buried with William, completing a circle that had begun 70 years earlier. Michael O'Brien's father had passed away in 2003, but his investigative archive proved crucial in confirming the patrol's identity. The detailed maps he had created matched perfectly with the cave system's location, demonstrating a father's intuitive understanding of his son's final mission. The forensic evidence painted a picture of extraordinary courage. The patrol had maintained military discipline, even in their final hours, with weapons cleaned and positioned defensively. They had rationed their supplies carefully and had apparently cared for wounded comrades despite their own desperate situation. Dr. Chen noted that the preservation conditions in the cave were exceptional. The constant sub-freezing temperatures had created a natural preservation environment, maintaining organic materials that would have deteriorated in most other locations. The valley's harsh climate, which had claimed the soldiers' lives, had also protected the evidence of their sacrifice. Each family member processed the news differently. Some felt relief that decades of uncertainty had finally ended. Others experienced renewed grief as the reality of loss replaced the ambiguity of missing. All expressed gratitude that their loved ones would finally receive proper burial with full military honors. The repatriation ceremony took place on a grey morning in November 2016, exactly 65 years after the patrol had been declared missing in action. 9 flag-draped coffins arrived at Dover Air Force Base, each carrying a soldier who had begun his final journey home decades after his sacrifice. Margaret Miller, supported by her son and granddaughter, watched as her husband's remains were returned to American soil. The honor guard's precision movements and the chaplain's prayers provided a dignity that had been denied for over 6 decades. John Jr. placed his hand on his father's coffin, finally able to say goodbye to a man he had never known, but had spent his entire life honoring. The Thompson family burial in Ohio drew hundreds of community members who had heard Eleanor Thompson's story over the decades. David's nieces and nephews, people he had never met, served as pallbearers for an uncle who had died before they were born. His girlfriend from 1951, now a great-grandmother, placed a single white rose on his coffin, keeping a promise she had made 70 years earlier. If this case has already hooked you, leave a like. This helps Sergeant Miller's story reach more people. Robert Hayes was laid to rest beside his parents in a California cemetery. His twin brother Richard, despite his advanced age, insisted on delivering the eulogy. Standing before the gathered crowd, he spoke about living with survivor's guilt and the strange comfort of finally being able to visit his brother's grave. The 2 brothers, separated by war, were finally reunited in peace. William Santos's funeral in Texas was conducted with full military honors and Catholic rites. The rosary recovered from the cave was buried with him, along with letters from nieces and nephews who had grown up hearing stories of their heroic uncle. Maria Santos, the mother who had kept a candle burning for 30 years, was buried beside her son just months after his return. Michael O'Brien's remains were interred in Boston with his detective father, who had spent decades investigating his son's disappearance. The O'Brien family donated Michael's father's research archive to the National Archives, ensuring that his investigative work would help other families searching for missing loved ones. James Richardson's funeral in Michigan brought together distant relatives who had never met but shared the bond of loss. His identification tags were presented to his sister's daughter, connecting a new generation to their family's military history. Thomas Chen was buried in San Francisco's military cemetery, his story inspiring Chinese-American community members who understood the particular challenges faced by minority servicemen during the 1950s. Andrew Peterson's remains returned to Minnesota, where his family had maintained a memorial scholarship for local students pursuing military service. The scholarship had helped dozens of young people over the decades, creating a living legacy that honored Andrew's memory while building future opportunities. Daniel Murphy's burial in New York was attended by members of his old unit who had survived the Korean War. These elderly veterans, now in their 80s and 90s, served as honorary pallbearers for a comrade they had never forgotten. Their presence provided a connection to the brotherhood of soldiers that transcended death. The military conducted a comprehensive analysis of the patrol's final battle, using modern forensic techniques to reconstruct the events of January 1951. The evidence confirmed that the 9 soldiers had fought with extraordinary courage against overwhelming odds, maintaining their position and military discipline until the end. Each soldier was posthumously awarded the Purple Heart, with several receiving additional commendations for valor. The award ceremonies provided recognition that was decades overdue, acknowledging sacrifice that had been hidden beneath Korean ice for over 6 decades. The successful recovery of Miller's patrol represented a breakthrough in battlefield archaeology and forensic science. Dr. Sarah Chen's team had employed technologies that didn't exist during previous search efforts, including advanced ground-penetrating radar, satellite imagery analysis, and improved DNA extraction techniques. The preservation conditions in the Chosin Valley cave system were extraordinary. Constant sub-freezing temperatures had created a natural preservation environment, similar to those found in Arctic archaeological sites. Organic materials that would have decomposed within years in temperate climates remained intact after 6 decades. DNA analysis played a crucial role in confirming identifications when traditional methods proved insufficient. Several of the soldiers' remains were fragmentary, requiring complex genetic analysis to establish positive identification. The process involved comparing DNA samples with living relatives, creating genetic profiles that linked the present with the past. Forensic odontology, the analysis of dental remains, provided additional confirmation for several identifications. Military dental records from 1951 were compared with recovered dental remains, creating positive matches that supported DNA findings. This multifaceted approach ensured accurate identification despite the passage of time. The excavation revealed details about the patrol's final battle that had been lost to history. Ballistics analysis of recovered ammunition and weapons provided insights into the intensity and duration of their final engagement. The evidence suggested a prolonged battle lasting several days, with the patrol maintaining organized resistance despite being outnumbered. Personal artifacts recovered from the site provided intimate details about the soldiers' lives and final thoughts. Letters, photographs, and personal items created a human connection across the decades, allowing families to understand their loved ones' experiences during those final days. The cave's geological conditions had created distinct preservation zones. Items buried in certain areas remained in excellent condition, while materials in other locations showed varying degrees of deterioration. Understanding these preservation patterns helped investigators prioritize their search efforts and predict where additional remains might be located. Modern imaging techniques allowed researchers to examine bone fragments for evidence of trauma, disease, or other medical conditions. This analysis provided information about the soldiers' health and potential causes of death, offering families details that had been impossible to determine through conventional means. The recovery operation required international cooperation between American, South Korean, and Chinese authorities. Political considerations that had prevented earlier search efforts were overcome through diplomatic channels, demonstrating how changing geopolitical relationships could facilitate humanitarian missions. The success of the Miller Patrol recovery established new protocols for similar missions in other theaters. Lessons learned about cave system excavation, preservation techniques, and identification procedures were incorporated into training programs for future recovery operations. Advanced chemical analysis of recovered materials provided information about environmental conditions during the soldiers' final days. Residue analysis revealed details about their diet, equipment maintenance, and survival strategies during their time in the cave system. The integration of historical research with modern scientific techniques proved crucial to the mission's success. Military historians worked alongside forensic specialists to create comprehensive profiles of each soldier's service record, deployment history, and final mission parameters. The successful recovery of Sergeant Miller's patrol created ripple effects throughout the military and civilian communities that extended far beyond the 9 families directly involved. The story reached national media attention in December 2016. with major television networks dedicating prime-time documentaries to the case. The Washington Post ran a 3-part series detailing the recovery operation, while CBS's 60 Minutes featured interviews with surviving family members and the scientific team responsible for the breakthrough. Margaret Miller, at 97 years old, became an inadvertent spokesperson for military families across the nation. Her first television interview, conducted from her living room in Clarksville, Tennessee, drew over 12 million viewers. Sitting in the same chair where she had waited for news of her husband for 65 years, she spoke with quiet dignity about the importance of never abandoning hope. "I always knew John would come home," she said, her weathered hands holding his recovered wedding ring. "I just had to live long enough to be here when he did." Her words resonated across military communities nationwide. Within weeks of the broadcast, Margaret received thousands of letters from families of missing servicemen from Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, and other conflicts. Each letter carried its own story of loss, hope, and the particular agony of not knowing. Margaret, with help from her granddaughter Sarah, began responding to each letter personally, creating an informal network of support that spanned generations and conflicts. The technological advances demonstrated in the Miller case led to immediate increases in congressional funding for military recovery operations. Senator Elizabeth Warren, who had lost a cousin in Vietnam, cited the Miller case during budget hearings. "The science exists to bring our heroes home. The question is whether we have the will to use it." The Defense Department's POW/MIA accounting agency saw its budget increase by 40% for the following fiscal year, allowing for expanded operations in Korea, Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. Military academies throughout the United States incorporated the Miller patrol case into their leadership curriculum. At West Point, cadets studied the patrol's tactical decisions during their final battle, analyzing how 9 soldiers maintained military discipline and mutual support under impossible conditions. The case became required reading in courses on military ethics, demonstrating how core values transcend even the most desperate circumstances. Colonel James Harrison, who taught leadership at the Command and General Staff College, used the Miller case to illustrate principles of small unit leadership. These men faced certain death, but maintained their formation, cared for their wounded and fought with tactical intelligence until the end, he told his students. They exemplified everything we hope to instill in our officers. The cave's forensic evidence supported this analysis, showing that the patrol had maintained ammunition discipline, established defensive positions, and apparently rotated watch duties even during their final hours. The case inspired private organizations to dramatically increase their support for military recovery efforts. The veterans of foreign wars launched the Miller Initiative, a fundraising campaign that raised over $2 million for recovery operations. Gold Star families, who had lost loved ones in more recent conflicts, found particular meaning in supporting efforts to locate servicemen from earlier wars, understanding that their own losses connected them to a continuum of military sacrifice. The American Battle Monuments Commission announced plans for a new memorial at Arlington National Cemetery, specifically honoring recovered servicemen. The memorial, funded through private donations inspired by the Miller case, would feature the names of all servicemen recovered through modern forensic techniques. Margaret Miller was invited to participate in the groundbreaking ceremony scheduled for Veterans Day 2017. Family members of other missing servicemen reached out to the Miller families through social media, veterans organizations, and military support groups. These connections created an informal network that proved invaluable for sharing information and providing emotional support. Robert Hayes' nephew started a Facebook group called Bringing Them Home, which grew to over 50,000 members within 6 months. The group shared leads, research tips, and emotional support for families navigating the complex process of searching for missing loved ones. The diplomatic success of the recovery mission opened doors for similar operations in other politically sensitive areas. The State Department, encouraged by the cooperative atmosphere that had enabled the Miller recovery, initiated discussions with Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia about expanding joint recovery operations. Ambassador Sarah Kim, who had coordinated diplomatic aspects of the Miller mission, was promoted to head a new State Department office focused on humanitarian recovery efforts. Scientific journals throughout the world published detailed analyses of the recovery techniques employed in the Miller case. The Journal of Forensic Archaeology dedicated an entire special issue to the case, featuring articles on ground-penetrating radar applications, DNA extraction from degraded remains, and cave system preservation conditions. Dr. Sarah Chen was invited to present her findings at international conferences in London, Berlin, and Tokyo, spreading knowledge that would benefit recovery operations worldwide. The emotional impact on recovery team members was profound and lasting. Dr. Chen reported that participating in the Miller mission fundamentally changed her approach to forensic archaeology. "We're not just recovering bones and artifacts," she explained during a lecture at the Smithsonian Institution. "We're restoring dignity to families and completing stories that were interrupted by tragedy." Several team members requested permanent assignment to military recovery operations, citing the meaningful nature of the work. Educational institutions developed comprehensive programs studying the intersection of science, history, and human dignity represented by military recovery operations. The University of Tennessee created a master's degree program in conflict archaeology, while George Washington University established a research center focused on missing persons cases. These programs attracted students from around the world, creating a new generation of specialists trained in both technical recovery methods and the sensitive human aspects of the work. Local communities in Korea, where recovery operations took place, developed unexpected connections to American military history. The mayor of the nearest town to the recovery site, Kim Jong-soo, organized cultural exchange programs with Clarksville, Tennessee, Margaret Miller's hometown. Korean students began studying English, using materials about the Miller Patrol, while American students learned Korean while researching the Korean War. Mental health professionals studying the family's experiences identified crucial insights about long-term grief, hope, and closure. Dr. Patricia Williams, a psychologist specializing in military families, published groundbreaking research on ambiguous loss, the particular psychological challenges faced by families of missing servicemen. The Miller family's journey through 65 years of uncertainty provided valuable data about resilience and the human capacity to maintain hope despite seemingly impossible circumstances. The research revealed that families of missing servicemen developed unique coping mechanisms different from those dealing with confirmed deaths. Margaret Miller's maintenance of her husband's photograph on the mantel, the Thompson family's preservation of David's room, and the Santos family's weekly airport vigils were not signs of denial, but rather healthy adaptations to ambiguous loss. These findings influenced military support services and grief counseling programs worldwide. Today, nearly a decade after the recovery, the Chosin Valley bears little resemblance to the frozen battlefield of 1951. Modern development has transformed much of the landscape, with highways and commercial buildings occupying ground where desperate battles once raged. However, the memory of those who fought and died there remains preserved through monuments, educational programs, and the continuing efforts of recovery teams seeking other missing servicemen who rest beneath the Korean soil. The Miller Patrol story has become an integral part of military lore, taught at service academies from West Point to Annapolis, from the Air Force Academy to the Coast Guard Academy. Their names, once known only to family members and etched on memorial walls among thousands of other missing servicemen, now inspire new generations of military personnel who understand that service involves risks that may not be fully resolved for decades. Margaret Miller passed away peacefully on a snowy morning in February 2018 at the age of 99, having lived nearly a full century and seen her husband properly honored and buried. Her granddaughter Sarah, who had been by her side during those final months, reported that Margaret's last coherent words were about John. "Tell him I kept the home fires burning." Her funeral was attended by hundreds of people she had never met, but whose lives had been touched by her story of faith and perseverance. The funeral service was conducted with military honors, recognizing Margaret not only as the widow of a war hero, but as a hero herself, a woman who had maintained hope and dignity through 67 years of uncertainty. The honor guard that folded the flag over her casket included soldiers from the same regiment in which her husband had served, creating a connection across nearly 7 decades of military tradition. John Miller, Jr., now in his 70s, established a comprehensive scholarship fund in his parents' names. The John and Margaret Miller Foundation has grown far beyond its modest beginnings, providing educational opportunities for children of military families while also funding research into advanced recovery techniques. The foundation has awarded over 300 scholarships and has contributed more than $5 million to recovery operations worldwide. The scholarship recipients represent a diverse cross-section of military families, including children of servicemen killed in Iraq and Afghanistan, descendants of World War II veterans, and young people whose parents serve in today's military. Each recipient must complete a research project related to military history, creating an ongoing educational legacy that ensures the stories of missing servicemen continue to be told and remembered. The cave system where the patrol made their final stand has been designated as an international historical site, with joint American, South Korean, and Chinese funding supporting the creation of a memorial park. The memorial, completed in 2022, honors not only the 9 American soldiers, but all servicemen from various nations who fought in the Korean conflict. The design incorporates elements representing the international nature of the conflict, while focusing on the universal themes of sacrifice and remembrance. The memorial features 9 bronze statues representing the patrol members, positioned as they might have appeared during their final battle. Each statue is accompanied by biographical information in Korean, Chinese, and English, telling the individual stories of young men who died far from home. A central monument displays the patrol's final radio transmission, recovered from military archives. Enemy contact, maintaining position, will hold as long as possible. Visitors to the memorial include not only American veterans and their families, but also Korean War veterans from 16 nations that participated in the conflict. Chinese visitors, including some who fought against American forces during the war, leave flowers at the memorial, demonstrating how shared humanity can transcend the divisions created by war. Advanced archaeological techniques pioneered during the Miller recovery continue to evolve and find application in cases worldwide. The ground-penetrating radar technology, refined for the Chosin Valley excavation, has been successfully employed in recovery missions throughout Southeast Asia, helping locate missing servicemen from the Vietnam War. DNA analysis protocols developed for the Miller case have been adapted for use in civilian mass casualty investigations, including natural disaster sites and aviation accidents. Dr. Sarah Chen now leads the International Consortium for Conflict Archaeology, a research organization that applies lessons learned from the Miller recovery to humanitarian missions worldwide. The consortium has assisted in recovery efforts in Bosnia, Rwanda, Syria, and other conflict zones, demonstrating how techniques developed for military applications can serve broader humanitarian purposes. The diplomatic cooperation required for the Miller mission established important precedents for similar humanitarian efforts. Countries that had previously been reluctant to permit recovery operations, citing sovereignty concerns or political sensitivities, became more willing to cooperate when they understood that such missions serve broader purposes of historical accuracy and human dignity. The success of the Miller recovery influenced policy decisions at the highest levels of government. President Biden, during a 2021 Veterans Day speech, cited the case as an example of America's commitment to leaving no one behind. Sergeant Miller and his patrol waited 65 years to come home, but America never stopped looking for them. That's a promise we make to every person who wears our uniform. The personal artifacts recovered from the cave have been preserved in the National Museum of American History, where they serve as tangible connections to the soldiers' humanity. The exhibition, titled Letters Never Sent: Personal Stories from the Korean War, displays John Miller's wedding ring, David Thompson's unfinished letter to his girlfriend, William Santos's rosary, and other items that transform abstract military history into deeply personal stories of love, loss, and sacrifice. The exhibition has become one of the museum's most visited displays, with over 2 million visitors since its opening. School groups from across the country make special trips to see the artifacts, with many teachers reporting that the display provides students with a more personal understanding of war's human cost than traditional textbook accounts. Children and grandchildren of the recovered soldiers have formed lasting relationships that extend far beyond their families' shared experience of loss and eventual closure. Annual reunions bring together people who might never have met otherwise, creating a community bound by history and mutual understanding. These gatherings have evolved into significant events, with family members traveling from across the country to maintain connections forged through tragedy and strengthened through closure. The second generation, the children who grew up without fathers, developed a particular bond. John Miller Jr., David Thompson Jr., and Robert Hayes III became close friends, sharing experiences of growing up with heroic but absent fathers. Their children, the third generation, have continued these relationships, ensuring that the bonds created through shared loss will endure for generations to come. The psychological research conducted on the Miller family's experiences has fundamentally influenced military support services for families of missing servicemen. The Department of Veterans Affairs implemented new counseling programs based on research findings about ambiguous loss and long-term grief. These programs now serve thousands of military families dealing with missing loved ones from conflicts in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other theaters. Dr. Patricia Williams's research on the Miller families led to the development of specialized training programs for military chaplains, social workers, and family readiness group leaders. The training helps military support personnel understand the unique challenges faced by families of missing servicemen and provides them with tools to offer appropriate support and hope without creating false expectations. Military recovery teams worldwide study the Miller case as the gold standard for comprehensive recovery operations. The integration of historical research, advanced technology, international cooperation, and family support has become the standard approach for similar missions. Training programs for recovery specialists include detailed case studies of the Miller recovery, emphasizing both technical procedures and the human dimensions of the work. The success of the Miller recovery has inspired increased public support for military recovery operations. Public opinion polls show that over 90% of Americans support continued efforts to locate missing servicemen, even from conflicts that ended decades ago. This support has translated into sustained political backing for recovery programs and increased funding for research into improved recovery techniques. Subscribe to our channel to explore more archived and disturbing cases. Thank you for following Sergeant Miller's story. We'll see you in the next video. The frozen valley that once seemed like humanity's enemy has revealed itself as an unexpected ally, preserving not only physical remains, but also the enduring power of love, hope, and the refusal to abandon those who have sacrificed everything in service to their country. The 9 soldiers who entered that valley as young men in 1951 finally returned home as honored heroes, their sacrifice recognized, and their families' 7-decade vigil finally, triumphantly ended. Their story continues to inspire new generations of Americans who understand that freedom requires sacrifice, that some debts can never be fully repaid, and that the promise to leave no one behind is not just a military slogan, but a sacred covenant between a nation and those who defend it. In the frozen valley where they made their final stand, Sergeant John Miller and his 8 brave comrades achieved something beyond military victory. They demonstrated that love and loyalty can transcend even death itself, connecting past and present in an unbroken chain of honor, sacrifice, and remembrance. In the end, the chosen valley taught us that some stories refuse to die, even when buried beneath decades of ice and silence. Sergeant John Miller and his 8 comrades entered that frozen wasteland as young soldiers following orders, but they emerged from it 75 years later as something far more profound, proof that love transcends time, that sacrifice echoes across generations, and that a nation's promise to never leave anyone behind is more than words carved in marble. Margaret Miller's 99 years on Earth were not defined by the 67 she spent waiting, but by the unwavering faith that carried her through each of those years. Her story reminds us that heroism is not only found on battlefields, but also in the quiet strength of those who refuse to surrender hope when hope seems impossible. The 9 families who waited, who grieved, who never stopped believing, became heroes in their own right. They carried the memory of their loved ones through decades of uncertainty, ensuring that these soldiers' stories would survive long enough for science and diplomacy to finally bring them home. Today, visitors to the memorial in Korea often ask guides about the significance of the 9 bronze figures standing eternal watch over the valley. The answer is always the same. They represent not just soldiers who died in a forgotten battle, but the enduring truth that some promises are too sacred to break, no matter how long they take to keep. The frozen valley kept its secrets for 65 years, but ultimately, Even the deepest cold could not silence the call of those who died believing they would one day return home. In their final victory over time and circumstance, they remind us that honor once earned becomes eternal, and that coming home is not just about returning to a place, but about finding peace at last.